Celebrate who had
us. Black History Houston with the vibe, Houston's culture,
and the choice. 90.9 KTSU, your community station, produced by Houston First.
Happy 50th anniversary, KTSU. 50 years broadcasting on the campus of Texas Southern University. Playing all your favorites.
Yeah, agreed.
Gospel. Jazz. Classic R&B. Hip-hop. Blue. And Zydeco. We are your community station for 50 years. The Choice, 90.9 KTSU Houston. The views and opinions expressed on Real World, Real Talk do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the management and staff at KTSU FM, nor Texas Southern University Administration and the Board of Regents. Welcome to Real World, Real Talk, the show that represents captivating conversations and insightful information to encourage and inspire you with all you need to become the best you can possibly be. And now your host for Real World, Real Talk, Dr. D.Z. Cofield.
What's going on, Houston? Welcome to a live edition of Real World, Real Talk.
50th anniversary celebration has just gone to the next level. Live Jazz is back in 2023.
Yeah, there we go. Welcome to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. D.Z. Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more. KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. I am super excited to be with you on tonight. We're trying something a little different, so we're going to see how this works out. But what I'm trying to do is actually make sure that we help you understand something that is really central to our life and our living, and that's the understanding of poverty. January is Poverty Awareness Month in the United States. Now, some of you may not have been aware of that, but it is true. And today we have an expert to help us talk about and think through what poverty is really about. How do we define it? How do we combat it? Some of us who come out of a background that was marked by poverty, was it generational poverty? Was it situational poverty? And how can we help other people? You know, the war on poverty that was launched in the 60s, that by any metric was successful in terms of the initial gains that were made. Now that has shifted and it became a war against the poor. And we have seen politicians take one person who took advantage of a situation and discount thousands of people who were able to climb out of generational poverty and situational poverty by those same programs. And so we're going to talk about that on tonight. And I want to thank all of you who are listening to KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. We are your community station. And I hope and pray that this gives you some insight. I want to thank those who are listening right now. I want to thank Sister Gaines. Hope she's listening on tonight, the wife of Dean Willie Gaines of the Gray School of Theology. Got a chance to run into them coming out from dinner with my wife last week, and she says she sets her alarm clock to make sure that she listens to Real World, Real Talk. So I want to thank her and everyone else who is a faithful listener. Now, our guest tonight is Elia Moreno. She is the author of Permission to Rest and Living Intentionally, a book that depicts her own personal journey and hard-earned insights on the importance of adding value to the lives of others in just 90 seconds. She currently serves as the executive director of Texas Christian Community Development Network. In addition to her role as executive director, she serves as the founder and CEO of Living Intentionally Ministries. She is also the national program director for Beagle Communication Across Barriers and holds the position of national director of community outreach for the No Excuses University network of schools, a growing network of 250 schools who promote college readiness for all students, especially those living in poverty. I'm really excited to have her. My wife and I just absolutely love this lady, and I want to thank her for consenting to be with us tonight on Real World, Real Talk. Elia, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on your show.
Man, listen, I am super, super excited about you being with us on today. I'm trying to work this tech stuff out so I can make sure that our guests hear you and hear you well. But I want to thank you for this talk tonight to help us gain a better understanding. You have been, I know for me and for my wife as well, our mentors in this journey of really being able to qualify and quantify poverty. I think it's something that a lot of people think about as almost this trap that you are born in and this place that you have to stay for your entire life. And then there are others who think, hey, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. If you listen to some people, just pull yourself up by your straps, and it's no problem. You can break the poverty cycle. But one of the things that I've learned from you over the years is that it is much more than that. And for those of us who serve in areas that are impoverished, for those of us who work with students and families who are socioeconomically in a very, very devastating and dangerous place in terms of just their day-to-day living, that we need to have the right information so we can create strategies that actually help and not hurt. And so let's talk today about poverty. This is National Poverty Awareness Month in the United States, the month of January. Why is it important for us to raise this issue?
I think it's important because I believe that our world is in a place where our desire is to qualify people as worthy before we help. And that's a dangerous place to be. I know that a lot of times when we get into a profession to be a practitioner, to serve people that are struggling, our heart's desire may be to serve people living in poverty, those that are struggling. But if we are not in a place where we're centered or where we understand poverty, we hurt more than we help. So I just believe it's so important that we get it right, because we do judge what we don't understand. And that's not a good place to be.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Our audience is saying they cannot hear you, which is not good. You're very, very low, and I'm trying to get this volume up. I tell you what, let's take a short break, and I am going to shift and see if we can move Elia to the telephone line. And we'll be back in just a moment. Give us an opportunity to see if we can work this out and help us get where we need to be. All right, we'll be back.
Let me get see if my daughter can help as well. Chris, will you see if you can help?
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Okay.
Join the Bob Houston's culture.
And KTSU as we celebrate who had a.
So I don't know if you can hear me. Can you still hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, the volume is very low, and I have my volume up as high as it can go. So
I have my daughter in here trying to help me bring the lot.
Call me. This is what I need you to do. Call me at 713.
Okay, hold on.
313-4354. You're coming through on Facebook, great. So I'm going to keep you on here, and Facebook actually can still hear us and see us now. So hey, Facebook.
Hey, Facebook.
But if you call on the number 713-313-4354, I will plug you into the phone line, and then we'll just
say it one more time. I'm sorry.
On the phone while you're talking on the camera, so everybody will hear you great.
So give me the number one more time. 713
313 4354.
4354.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, just you don't have to put the phone up and so but you don't have to talk on the phone and on the air at the same time on the camera.
Okay.
We'll just work it like that.
Okay.
The broader offer will level the playing field and fight for your rights. Their goal is to earn for your needs. Your info
All right.
That means 43365.
All right. Welcome back to Real World, Real Talk. I have Elia on the telephone now. For those of you who are listening via Facebook, you are still able to hear without any problems. So you heard me give this great introduction, and then we got ready to talk, and everybody was like, oh my God, we can't hear her. So we had some troubles with the technical side, but we got her now. Elia, how are you?
I'm doing well. I have a
Good.
lot of work, so I said a lot of things, so it's sad that I couldn't be heard.
That's all right. Let's start over. Let's talk about National Poverty Awareness Month this month. Why do you think it's so important? I know it's central to the work that you do. Why is it important for all of us to stop and think about poverty in this country?
It is because we live in a time where our desire is to qualify people as worthy before we help. And that's not a good place to be. And we typically go to a place where we assume or we judge what we don't understand. So when we understand poverty, we are better able to serve people living in poverty. And that's where we want to be. It doesn't matter how much our heart's desire is to serve. If I say this is my calling in life, if I'm not informed, then I don't do justice to the work that God has called me to do.
Okay, so Eli, let's go back, because you said something in the beginning. You said we feel like we have to deem people worthy before we'll help them.
That's correct.
Just expand that for our listening audience, if you will.
So I think that the number one thing, so I'm working on a new project. I have a book that's titled By the Water's Edge, and it's on Isaiah 61. It is about poverty and how we serve poverty. And it starts with the first judgmental phrase that I hear everywhere I go, and I work all across the country. The phrase is, if they would just make better decisions. And so then my question after that is, do we pause and not help because we ask ourselves that if they would just make better choices, if they would just make better decisions? And the reality is we don't all have the same choices. We don't all have the same opportunities, right? I may be deciding to what I'm going to pay in order to put money in savings. And some people may be deciding on, can I pay rent or can I put food on the table? According to census, we have people struggling with poverty that are working 1.7 jobs and still not able to pay rent and still not able to put food on the table at the same time.
Wow. So let's talk about that, because I think there are many people who are looking at poverty, and to your point, it seems like we at least had a moment of awakening when COVID-19 hit, and people were put into situational poverty. Those who were in generational poverty, their generational poverty was exasperated in COVID-19. But it seems like people got a taste of, I'm here through no fault of my own. Like, even though I worked hard and I saved, I'm here through no fault of my own. Did that help change our view or our perspective of poverty in this country? Or do you think we've defaulted back to those old thoughts and old mindsets?
I think for a time, Dr. Cofield, we were in a place where no one could go and attain toilet paper because there wasn't any. We had a number, the number is 21 million people fell into situational poverty that have never experienced poverty before. And we were at a time in our life, a time in space where you didn't need to fill out paperwork in order to receive food. Do you remember the long lines of churches, community service organizations, schools that said, line up and we'll put a box of food in your trunk? And the cars varied from a 20-year-old vehicle to a car like a Mercedes or a Lexus or what have you. People were in need, and we all came together for a time and said, this is an issue. Let's work to make this possible, where nobody's going hungry, where people are receiving what they need during this time. And it was also a time when we experienced isolation. It was like God saying, okay, everyone in timeout, let's stay in your homes and think about how we're treating each other. So we got a taste of the isolation that someone in poverty feels. In our country, we internalize poverty. We start to believe as people that we are deficient. I don't understand that the situation that I'm living in is deficient. I believe that I am deficient because I've internalized that. So I pick up this large label of shame, and I stand in isolation, wanting to be a part of, right? Maslow's hierarchy of need states. We're all born with this innate desire to belong, and I want to belong. I just don't know how, because I don't have the right shoes. I don't have the right car, don't have the right education, all these things that our community says are important in order to be a part of, in order to belong. And I'm not able to attain that. So I'm going to make choices sometimes as a parent to allow my child to belong that you may question, that you may criticize, that you may judge, because you don't understand poverty.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of poverty, because I think our audience needs to know all poverty is not created equal, right? We just hear the word poverty and we think, yeah, I'm poor, or I was poor. I slept on my brother's couch for 6 months, when I lost my job, but I was able to pull myself up and get it together, and you can do it too. So help our audience understand the different kinds of poverty and what are some of the major poverties that we deal with in this country.
We have generational poverty, situational poverty, multidimensional poverty, immigrant poverty, student poverty, incarceration poverty, mental health poverty. We have people struggling with homelessness. That's a different type of poverty. And we create programs in our country like poverty is a word and it's an umbrella. And everyone struggling with poverty falls underneath that one umbrella. And that is not the case. Poverty looks different. Generational poverty is the deepest poverty in our country. And when we create programs like an 18-month program or a year program in order to help people come out of poverty, people in generational poverty are not going to have what it takes, like the transportation to get there, the vocabulary to do what's necessary, the know-how to fill out paperwork, to work in this print culture that we live in. And someone in situational poverty is going to be able to have that capacity. So typically the programs that are created in our country are targeted to people struggling with situational poverty. That means if I'm struggling with situational poverty, is that I've lived middle class or working class for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I have the vocabulary, I have the know-how, I have the capacity and the network of people that might help me get there, right? Or I have the transportation to get to that place in order to be able to work this program. And the people in generational poverty may not. And we judge the people that don't make it as they don't want it bad enough. They don't want to work at it. They just want to live off the system. And those are judgments because we don't understand poverty.
Mm. So let's talk for a moment about generational poverty. What are some of the traits of generational poverty? And the reason I'm asking that is because I think I was talking to a friend who is doing, I think by all accounts, well, but there's still a mentality that he has there. And he said something to me that I thought was interesting. He said, man, I still work like I'm broke. I still hustle like I'm broke. I still live in some ways like I'm broke because I'm afraid of going back to where I used to be. Right. And so everything that he does, is almost to the extreme. And I'm like, hey, man, it's okay. Like, you relax for a minute. He's like, man, that's just my mentality, because that's what I've come out of. I'm the first person in my family to go to school. I'm the first person in my family to have a successful business. I'm the first person in my family to own a home, and now multiple homes. He's in real estate, but he's a hustler. There's no question about it. He works really, really hard. And we were talking about that mentality. Talk about some of the traits of generational poverty.
People that struggle with generational poverty are typically very mobile, don't live in a place for a long time. And it's because I'm not able to pay rent. So I get evicted. So I go on to the next place. And the next person to rent to me is probably not going to check my credit. So it's a house that's probably not deemed a standard, a standard place to live in. Low literacy, working low paying jobs in order to just make it through the day, not necessarily the month. People in generational poverty also struggle a lot with that internalization. So what your friend is probably struggling with is the trauma that he endured while living in poverty, because when I walk into the room and I'm struggling with generational poverty, I know that you don't want to hear me. I know that I may not dress the part or speak the part right. I may not have clean hair because I don't have running water in my house, or even if I have running water, I may not have the $2 to buy a bar of soap or whatever is needed, right? I'm just trying to make it through the day. And if I come in with a little bit of money, I may spend, money to buy a rental game for my son or daughter so that they can be part of that conversation in school. But these are things that we judge because we think all poverty is the same. Generational poverty, like I said, is the deepest poverty in our country. And at some point, I think people struggle with generational poverty. I have the founder of Communication Across Barriers is Dr. Donna Beagle, and she has been my mentor for the past 12 years. And I know the majority about what I know about poverty by what I have learned from her. She is a woman that struggled with generational poverty for the first 26 years of her life. And at 26, she started to work on her GD, and she went from GD to her doctorate in 10 years. And she talks a lot about the importance of feeling like she belonged. And it took her many, many years not feeling like she belonged. Everything she was criticized about or judged about as a child living in poverty are what she struggles with today, as far as I have to have the nice home, I have to have, my hair looking just right. It really is something that's internalized. And I think that's the hardest part of working with people living in poverty and even teaching the importance of becoming poverty informed, is that we don't understand how harming our words can be when we are serving if we don't accurately understand poverty.
So as you work with poverty, or work with the subject of poverty and help organizations think through this, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have, even people with good hearts, right? Because many times, organizations, I think, start off and they mean well, but sometimes their charity, to borrow the title of the book, can be toxic, right? Sometimes it's not always beneficial the way they do things, even though they have the right intention. What are some of the big misconceptions that you see organizations having when they're addressing people who are in poverty and how to help them?
Well, because we know what we know about poverty by what we watch from the media, that's our teacher, that's our educator. We don't graduate people from any profession truly understanding what poverty is. And if we've ever experienced poverty, we're likely to be judgmental about someone experiencing a different kind of poverty, because we have that mentality that we say, well, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. Why can't you? You just don't want it bad enough. You're not working hard enough, right? And so let me give you my misconception, my judgment about people living in poverty. And I have never not known Christ. I've always been part of the church, and I considered myself giving and compassionate my whole life until I learned from Dr. Beagle the realities about poverty. And for me, I used to be a turkey tosser. I used to go to the neighborhood during the holiday, and I would toss that turkey over the fence. I would pat myself on the back, and I would go back to my neighborhood, and I would do it year after year. And finally, I would get jaded. I would go to the home, and there's 2 dogs in the backyard, and I'm upset because you can't feed your kids, but you have 2 dogs. I didn't understand that. And what that is that the family's trying to belong, to be part of that conversation. If Timmy comes home from school and says, Mom, my friend John got a puppy for his birthday, and my teacher said that he can bring him to show and tell, on show and tell day. And he's so cute, and this is what he does. When Mom goes to the grocery store and she sees someone giving away puppies, she's not going to pause and look at her budget to see if she can afford a dog collar or a vet or dog food that you can't buy with SNAP benefits, right? She's going to take that puppy home so that her son has the sense of belonging, because she knows what it is not to belong. And as consumers, we spend, and I'm not judging because I have a dog, we spend $92 billion on dog care per year.
92
billion. 248 million of that on dog costumes for Halloween. we are saying this is important. This is how you belong. This is how you are a part of, right? And then we judge the very thing that our families are trying to do in order to be a part of. How many of us get upset when we see someone struggling with poverty that has their nails done, or that has a certain lipstick, or that has their hair done? Well, the goal is, I want to belong, I want to be a part of, right? And they're not able to. And I'm not asking that we condone the behavior. I'm asking that we try and understand the behavior, so that we're at a place that when we serve, we extend dignity, right? And it's not necessarily the words. Did I ever go into a home when I was taking a turkey basket and talk negatively to the parent, or question, or judge, or criticize? No. But she knew, right? 93% of our body language is what speaks. It's not necessarily the words that come out of our mouth. Think of a party that you go to, or an event, a gala or school, and you know that there's someone there that doesn't want you there, doesn't want to talk to you. They don't have to come up and tell you, I don't want you here, I don't want to talk to you, right? You know. So the same thing with the families we serve. We're not in a good place because we don't understand poverty, where we can extend dignity to those that we are serving. So no matter how wholeheartedly we want to serve, when we don't understand poverty, we fall short, and we hurt more than we help.
You know, it's interesting as you say that, because I can remember, I am a Moreno convert. You helped me with this first time I heard you, because I literally remember riding down the street and a person, asking for, a handout, asking for alms, if you would, and me looking, saying, "Man, you have a dog. Like, you can't afford a dog. How you gonna ask me for some money to help you eat?" I mean, I didn't think about the emotional issue. I didn't think about, the sense of belonging, the sense even of what a dog brings in terms of, camaraderie and companionship and all of those things. And how dogs are, really a big part of people's mental health and wellness. We talk about service animals now, right? I never thought about that. I just looked and said, "Hey, you can't afford this." Or the other example you gave is, your child's walking around here with sneakers that my child doesn't have on. Why would you make that kind of purchase? Never thinking about the why behind what was done. Let's talk a little bit about our country and the war on poverty that shifted to become the war against the poor. And as much as we say we're doing now, we're really not doing much in comparison to what has been done in the past. So let's talk about numbers in terms of, even how do you access care? We have people who are listening right now, and, my heart goes out to them, because I think there's one group of people who are a part of poverty, typically situational poverty, and that's veterans. Many of whom have not been able to get the proper rating. They go through circle after circle and jump through hoop after hoop. And we had one person who called me and said, "Pastor, thank you for your food pantry." This is when we were doing it once a month. We've been doing it once a week now, since COVID started. But when we were doing it once a month, she called and literally said, "Thank you," because there are times when we get to the end of the month that we don't know how we're going to eat if it wasn't for your food pantry. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, but your husband was a veteran. He served this country. You shouldn't be going through this. We're just talking about food. So let's talk about what was going on in the 60s, and then what is going on today in the 2020s.
So I think what we don't know is that in the 60s, when we launched this war on poverty, and we sat around the table as Americans and decided who receives assistance, right? We said, if you have a family of 4, in order to receive assistance, you have to make less than, I believe the number was 22,000 per year. So if you made less than that, you were able to attain assistance. So now we're from the 60s to today is about 54 years later. And that was 22,000 that you had to make below in order to receive assistance. And today that number is about 26,000. It has only gone up less than a handful of $1,000, right? For people to receive assistance. So we all know that there's no way that a family of four can make 30,000 and not be in poverty. The number is inaccurate. And I believe that we're stuck in that number, because if we raised it to the real number, which the average income that a family needs to make across our country in order to make ends meet is about 45 to 48,000. So if you put people in that category, how many people in our country would be living in poverty today?
Yeah.
Who wants to be known for passing a law that's saying, okay, we quadrupled the number of poverty in our country?
And let me just give our listening audience something simple to think about. In 1965, the average retail price of gas was 31 cents a gallon in 1965. So we said, if you make $24,000 when gas was 31 cents a gallon, you were entitled to benefits. You were considered impoverished. Here we are now, 50 plus years later. Gas is $2.77 average per gallon, which means that's almost 9%, nine times as much. We was making 24,000. We said, hey, you can make it. Now we're saying, oh, if you make 25 or 26, and it puts a lot of people in a really bad position. And I think a lot of people got a bad rap. And I don't know how you feel about this, Elia, even during COVID, when people had trouble hiring people because it was more beneficial and more profitable for them to stay at home. Like they really literally netted more when they didn't have to pay for transportation. They didn't have to pay for childcare, and they were receiving benefits. And we're not talking about impoverished people. We're talking about working people who said, hey, it's easier for me just to stay home and I'm going to do better. And, I may be poor, working poor, but that doesn't mean I'm stupid. I can work a calculator and I can make more money just being at home.
Right. And I think the misconception is that all these people just stopped working because, hey, I don't want to work. I want to be lazy. I want to sit on the couch. The thing is there was a worriedness, right? Nobody wanted to catch COVID. And what was the rate? How much higher was the rate for African Americans and Latinos to actually contract COVID than other people, right? So you have that to take into account too. And we just think everyone just stopped working, and that's not the case. Out of the people that applied for benefits, I think it was like 36 million, only 44% actually received benefits. And if I'm your employer, Dr. Cofield, and I say, I'm going to lay you off because our nonprofit has to shut for 2 months, and then I call you back in 2 months because we're ready to be open. If you say, no, I want to stay at home and continue receiving benefits, I could call an employment office and let them know you were offered your job and you would lose your benefits. So it wasn't as clean cut saying, well, I'm just not going to work. Was it beneficial to those that were able to receive that money? Yes. But people in generational poverty were the first to be impacted by COVID, and they will be the last to recover. And that recovery will take 8 to 10 years for them to get to the poverty that they were before the impacts of COVID. Wow,
that's amazing. So let's talk about the movement out of generational poverty. You asked the question, and I was super stoked, right, to answer the question. I'm answering. I don't think I answered out loud. I think I answered in my mind. But you asked the question, what is the best way to help break generational poverty in a person's life? How do we help people break it? And the two most popular answers were help them get a job, and if necessary, before they get a job, help them get their education. And when you said, wrong answer, I was like, wait a minute, hold on, what? So for those who are listening right now, we say, what's the best way to help somebody break generational poverty? Whether it's an adult or a child, what's the best way? And if you're thinking, I'm talking to my listeners now, get them educated and get them a job. That's not the first step. So Elia, give us the steps that we need to take, because I think so many people undervalue the things that may have impacted them the most, especially those who have been fortunate enough and blessed to come out of generational poverty. They don't realize the role that things have played in their life. They look now and say, well, I went to school and I got a scholarship but they don't talk about why did they get a scholarship? What inspired them to be the first person in their family to get a certification or a 4-year degree, or what gave them even the mindset to say, I can do this, or I can achieve this, or I can purchase a home. So talk about the two things, and I want us to really deep dive into this, because I think for a lot of people who really want to help, they have a great heart, but they just don't know how. And let's help them begin understanding how.
I always say we are the answer to poverty. It is people. And the top two things in order out of Dr. Beagle's study when she was working on her dissertation, she found that the number two things that cycle people out of poverty, the top two things, one is mentorship and the second one is extracurricular activities. And I'll tell you why. Mentorship is I add value to a person. We have two choices when we encounter a human being. We either add value or we take value. You go to the store, you put your drink on the counter, your phone rings, you answer it without saying a word. You tell the person in front of you that's ringing up your drink, you don't matter. You're not important. Let me take value. You're not worthy, right? Same scenario, you turn your phone off without saying a word. You tell the person you matter. You are important. Here's value. You are worthy. In mentorship, you expose people to opportunities they wouldn't typically be exposed to. If I'm living in generational poverty, I'm going to learn from the best role model I have, and that's probably my parents or my grandmother or my uncles and aunts, and I want to do what I can to be just like them because they're surviving. They're able to keep going day after day, right? If that is all I know, that is all I will know to do. A mentor will open the eyes of someone struggling in poverty because you're going to hear about my lived experience. I may take you out for a soda in a restaurant you've never gone to. I may talk to you about a family member. I may learn from you, my mentor, that you struggle too, that it's not that we all have the same life and you're just doing better. It's that our lives are different and our lived experience is different. That is why mentorship is so important, is because I'm being exposed to things I wouldn't typically be exposed to. Number two is that extracurricular activity. Back to Maslow's hierarchy of need. We're born with this innate desire to belong. When I'm part of an extracurricular activity, I belong. I wear the same uniform. I talk the same language as far as football or basketball or soccer or boxing or whatever that may be. I am part of something bigger than myself. Those are the two things that really allow a person to propel and cycle out, because it's important. It's so important that we understand how powerful this sense of belonging is. I want to belong. I want to be a part of. And if you pause just for a minute, whoever you are, whatever you do, however much money you have, how much money you don't have, however much education you have, or however much education you don't have, you pause for a minute, think of the things that you belong to. Think of the things that you are part of, right? And it's so quick when you were talking, Dr. Cofield, about our veterans and the struggle with need, and that should not be the case in our country. That should not be the case. Even with homelessness, when I began this journey about 12 years ago, I wanted to learn more about homelessness. And I thought I am going to go to a simulation and learn a little bit more. One of the simulations that I attended, I remember going with, it actually was the CEO of a United Way, and then a college student that served as my intern. And during the time when we went through the simulation, trying to get through a weekend without access to anything aside from what we were wearing, right? So we had to figure out how to eat. We had to figure out a way to figure out what the time was. We didn't keep any of our stuffs. And I remember that our goal was to find a nickel, because we had found a quarter and we just needed a nickel. And if we had a nickel, we could go into a convenience store. And at that time, the Little Debbie snacks were 30 cents. So we could buy a Little Debbie snack, we'd take a penny or so from the little change thing, and then we would give the youngster the one whole stick of the Nutter Butter, and then me and the other lady were going to split one, and that was going to be our meal. So the whole time, I'm telling you, for about 32 hours, we looked for a nickel and could not find one. So the simulation's over. We get our credit cards back. We're about to go. We shower and change, and we go to a restaurant. We're going to have a steak at this point, right, to celebrate that we survived this. And I remember that they got out of the car and they were walking towards the door of. Headed towards the door to the restaurant, and I was locking up the car, and I closed the door and I was walking behind them, and I noticed that both of them had their head bowed, and I really got emotional because I thought, I know what they're doing. In the short time, in the 48 hours that we had been in this situation, the simulation, they had internalized the poverty, and I knew they were looking for a nickel. And I said, "What are y'all doing?" And they both turned around and said, "We're looking for a nickel so we could have that Nutter Butter to eat." It's that sense of belonging and not having that internalizing. And when you have a mentor that is present, someone that is able to expose you to other things, this is what happens when we do what we do in love. And when we understand poverty, we will do what we do in love. It creates an atmosphere of hope. And when there is hope in a human being, it's game on. Things change.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU. And I'm also on Facebook Live. I want to thank all of you who are listening and listen every week when we come on to share information that's vital. So mentoring and extracurricular activities. Here's what's interesting, Elia, and I want to talk about this philosophy of addressing poverty when it comes to education, because I was just talking to somebody and they were talking about a school and they were meeting with their staff and their leadership, and they have a Title I school. The majority of their students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And they were talking about cutting all of their extracurricular activities, right? That these kids don't need extracurricular activities. They just need to spend time in the books. And I was like, no, like you really don't understand how to help these kids. What's being done in the world of education around this? I know my wife is listening and she is super, super passionate, as you know, about this in regards to how we approach children and families that are in generational poverty and some in situational poverty, and how schools can better serve them. What are your thoughts around that?
It is people like you, for sure, that will stand up at a board meeting and ask the question, what are we doing about becoming poverty informed? How are we taking a holistic approach to serving our students, which means not just the student, but the parent? How many GED labs do we have in our schools where the parents can access to work on a GED so that they're part of something, they believe like they belong? How many parents in poverty are we engaging to be part of PTA? Is there a PTA? And I know that in a lot of schools there's not. We that are poverty informed have to make that a priority, to be part of that conversation when we're talking about, just like you did, like when someone's talking about taking out extracurricular activities, to say we better become poverty informed so that we know how to make the decisions. And that's the thing in Congress and Senate and all policymakers. If they are not poverty informed, they are making decisions about people living in poverty through their lived experience. And typically that lived experience is middle class or upper middle class. And that is why we are in trouble. And my goal is not to dog or to condemn or to judge anyone that's making decisions. My comment, my statement is, if you want to do better, learn so that you're better able to serve in the way that you want to, because you're holding office for a reason, right? You're holding office to serve the people of your community, of your county, of your state, of your country. What can you do to become poverty informed so that we can eradicate poverty in our lifetime? And I believe it's possible. I believe that we can do it.
So, how do we inspire? We have people who are listening to our show across the country, across the world. We have a number of politicians and their staffers who are listening. What are some of the first steps we need to take? If I ask you how to help our public servants become more poverty informed and why that's important, what are some of the first steps that you would say to them?
Uh, I think the first thing I would do anytime I go into a community, I do a community listening. And I bring people to the table that aren't necessarily middle class or upper middle class. I bring people from the neighborhood together. And I would bring someone like me, someone that's just a simple person, with no weight, to have the conversation and be part of the conversation. I'm working with a community in Houston right now, and I'm not the one in charge. I'm not the leader. I'm there to serve. I'm there to volunteer in hopes to learn from the community. I think we feel at some point in life that we've learned all we can, or I know it all because I have, the 27 degrees or all of this, and that's not the case. We cannot stop learning, and poverty has evolved. So it doesn't matter if you took a class in college that had one chapter about poverty, it does not look the same because poverty is not the same.
Yeah, I agree. It's just so critical. And I think it's important for people to understand that we are better as a society when we become poverty informed. We become better not just in helping those who are in poverty, but helping those of us who are not in poverty, but for the grace of God, right? That we actually can aid people and help people in a meaningful way to do better. One of the things that always strikes me, and I think it goes to the same mentality, but I'd like for you to address it, is when people are helping people and they think just because somebody comes for assistance, they don't have the right to choose. They don't have the right to have likes or dislikes. you know, we had some people who formerly worked in our food pantry, and one of them made a comment on their way out the door that, these people are coming to get help. Beggars can't be choosy. One person came through the line and they said, listen, I don't want any milk. And they were like, well, you got to take the milk. Milk is part of the package. And he's like, yeah, but I don't drink milk. I don't drink milk. I don't want milk. I don't want to waste it, leave it for somebody else. And they were like trying to force them to take this milk. And, one person said, hey, I know I don't eat that. I don't like that. And it's like, well, hey, man, beggars can't be choosy. They should have taken everything. They should be grateful that they have this. Where do we get this sense that people who are poor can't have tastes, can't have desires, can't have wants? Like, where does that come from?
I think
And
when
don't be
we are
nice, Elia. Just tell us, where's it coming from?
really, really politically correct and cordial right now. I'm a big fan, Dr. Cofield. So the thing is, if someone, especially when I work with nonprofits and churches, we haven't even talked about how it's going to be the church to lead us out. It really is. But how many pastors are brave enough to stand at the pulpit and not just have the one courageous conversation, but to continue having the conversation regardless of how hard it gets, right? When someone is serving in a capacity of serving food and they're not poverty informed, how many trainings will you have within a year in order for your people to have the opportunity to better understand poverty? Is it too much time, right? So it goes with the leaders. It really is going to be the church to be able to cycle us out of this poverty, and it's by understanding poverty. So when someone says beggars can't be choosers, and I hear that a lot, it's because they may be struggling with poverty themselves and they've been handed something that might not be what they needed, or what they wanted for that that particular problem. That's not the solution that they wanted, but they didn't have a choice. So that I'm going to pass that on to the person that I'm serving and allow them the same thought. Well, you don't have a choice either. If I didn't have a choice, well, why are you better than me that you would have a choice?
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I think so many times out of our own trauma, out of our own pain, we treat others. We all know the saying, hurt people. And because we've been hurt, they tend to be hurt. And I've noticed even with education, many parents still have unresolved trauma from their own educational experiences. And many times they bring that unresolved anger and trauma to school when they're dealing with their own children's issues. And so, yeah, there's a strategy that I think we have to implement. And again, I think it comes down to us being more poverty informed and less poverty ignorant. Man, our time has gone by so fast. As we get ready to conclude, we've got about 5 minutes left. It goes by so fast. We normally, when Elia and I and my wife, when we're together, we get at least 3 hours of her. So this 1 hour show thing, man, is hard to deal with because there's so much to deal with. What are some final thoughts, though, you want to say to our listening audience who are concerned, some of whom are committed, some of them are very compassionate? They have a zeal, but not necessarily according to knowledge. What are some books that you would encourage them to read, including your own? What are some courses that they can take? What's some information they can get online to help them become more poverty informed?
I encourage a poverty simulation, and maybe Good Hope is willing to host a poverty simulation for people to go through to better understand poverty. That was so much of my deep learning came from the poverty simulation, where you're kind of hands-on and having to go through the struggle for a little bit gives you a hint, especially those that have never struggled with poverty. Number two would be there's a book called See Poverty Be the Difference by Dr. Donna Beagle. It is a great read, and it's the only true account of someone that has actually struggled with generational poverty, cycled out, and researched poverty in a way that is now helping communities all across the country become poverty informed. The next book that I would recommend is Living Intentionally, which is my first book, and it is how do you connect with people living in poverty, because we may become poverty informed, but if we're not able to communicate the message we're trying to give to someone struggling in poverty, then there's that disconnect, and we can talk until we're blue in the face and we're still not relating that information. And it has to do with how do we communicate. Walter Ong wrote a book called Orality and Literacy, and it is on the two ways that we communicate in our world and the importance of that when you're working with people, whatever class of people you're working with. It really gives you a foundation, a basis on how to better serve.
I think the seeing poverty and being the difference, tremendous book. And your book, Living Intentionally, was life-changing for me, and I know it was for my wife as well. And the simple idea of adding value or taking value away from people, especially for those who are Christ followers, people who have any kind of religious belief. But even if you don't, if you are an atheist, you still should live in a way that adds value to people. All of us want value added to us. And it happened to me today, and I thought about you because I was talking to a young man who was super excited. I had preached at his church. He heard me in Austin, Texas. He's in Houston now, and he came to the church to visit, and he wanted to tell me a story. And as he was talking, one of my older members walked up, and she's on a walker. She doesn't stand long. She doesn't stand well. And he wanted to get into the story. And I just told him, I said, well, just wait 1 second, just hold on, because I knew I needed to add value to her. Right. And she had on her mask. And I said, it's so good to see you. And she said, you don't even know who this is. And I said, come on, I know who you are. And she said, what's my name? And so I called her by her name, of course. And she was tickled, and her sister said, I deal with that all the time. Right. And so, but then I turned around back to him and I was like, okay, whoever else gets in line, they're going to have to wait. Like, I want to give complete attention to this guy. And he told me the story, and I used this illustration in the message, and he told me how he used the illustration in his presentation and, how awesome it was. And he just wanted to thank me. And then I was able to connect him with another member who was a member of that same church in Austin, who is now a member of our church. And I thought about you, and I thought about, and I tell our church, I tell our members, I've been doing a lot of training with churches from around the country, and I've been just talking about the idea of discipling, and part of discipling, part of encouraging people is adding value to people. And we just don't do it enough. And I think, if nothing else, just learning how to do that verbally and non-verbally is life-changing. Elia, I want to thank you for being with us tonight on Real World Real Talk. I've got to get ready to get out of here and make way for our next show. They'll be coming in just a minute, but thank you so much for being with us. If anybody wants to contact you, maybe they want to have you come in and do a training. I know you crisscross the country, but you've got 10 jobs. But if there's anybody that wants to use you, wants to get in touch with you, wants to find out how they can bring you in to do a training on poverty to help their group become more poverty informed, how can they get in contact with you?
You can actually Google my name and my information pops up, or you can email me at eliamoreno@live.com.
Okay, just Google it.
Yeah.
Elia is ELIAMORENO. So if you just Google it, I got to tell you something, Elia. I'm as a kid growing up in the Jacob Reese Housing Projects in New York City, I never thought you could Google me and something would come up. That's like just kind of cool. So the fact that you just say, just Google me, I don't think most people think about that when they're growing up, especially in our generation. But I want to thank you so much for being with us. My wife texted me to tell you how much she loves you. You already know she's going to call you anyway. And we're looking forward to the next time you're in the Houston area. But thank you so much for being with us on tonight.
Thank you so much. So much love. I love Tori and I love you, Dr. Cofield. Thank you so much for the love.
Appreciate you. The late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And listen, when we talk about poverty, let's remember that we're talking about people, right? We're talking about people. I hate to get preachery, but let me do this. All of us know John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life, right? But God came for people. It's always about people. And if we have a relationship and it makes us better, then we have, I think, an obligation, a moral obligation to help other people be the best that they can be, to add value to their life and to their living. And so I want to encourage you today. Living Intentionally by Elia Moreno is a tremendous read. Seeing poverty and being the difference, making a difference in people's lives. Tremendous read. Because the truth of the matter is, we all deal with people. If they're not in generational poverty or situational poverty, they may be dealing with a poverty mentality, right? That causes them to live in the moment, not living, thinking ahead, right? They're in survival mode all the time. And so you may be looking at them saying, well, man, why don't you make better decisions? Think long-term. Man, people in generational poverty don't think long-term. They're trying to make it day by day, just like the example she gave with the poverty simulation of just looking for a nickel, just a nickel to try to make it, right? And so it's important for us to understand the people that we are being asked to love. And let's make sure that we're not perpetuators of the problem. Let's make sure we're really solutions to the problem. I'm Dr. DZ Cofield for Real World Real Talk. You're listening to 90.9 KTSU. We are your community station. I'm signing off. Get ready for Truth with V. Michael McKay, David Goldstein, Asia, and the rest of the crew. Until next time, God bless you and God keep you is my prayer. And, listen, if I haven't talked to you yet, you know what? I think it's still appropriate. Happy New Year. And I hope and pray that you have a great, great New Year. Bye-bye.
Thank Thank you for listening to Real World, Real Talk. Make plans to join us next Sunday beginning at 6 p.m. Coming up next, Truth with your host, V. Michael McKay, David Goldstein, and Asia Graves on The Choice 90.9 KTSU, your community station.